Ja, herzlich willkommen beim
Hello, welcome at DTP TV, the German Prevention Congress, in an online format. Before we go back to the traditional format, we will present two topics. So you have already anticipated some of the points, some are well known, but let me just tell you that we from Berlin had to change a little bit the agenda. So first of all, we will hear first a presentation. If you have any comments, please write so please write your questions in the chat. They will be answered afterwards in the discussion session at midday. These two presentations will be also recorded, but they will not be published. So unfortunately, we cannot avoid, from a technical viewpoint, the audio recording, but they will not be published. So everything which is being said today will not be published in the internet. In this respect, I'd like to say hello to you. And so first of all, we would like to start with our presentation, which is about violence prevention in schools. We base our presentation on the work carried out by the Violence Prevention Unit, which is a unit working on behalf of the Berlin State Commission Against Violence, is funded by the Regional Commission, and it monitors the evolution and the development of programs and projects in the field of violence prevention. Incidentally, we can also see that there are different studies and appraisals on violence in schools, especially regional concepts for the prevention of violence. So especially as far as schools are concerned, we also developed a counseling and action framework for the interdisciplinary topic of violence prevention in the Berlin educational program. Well, first of all, let me give you an overview of the main topics. So I'm sorry, our computer is a bit slow, but I think you will see the next slide in a minute. So first of all, let's have a look at the violence in schools. So with our monitoring exercise, we also combined the results with police statistics, and we see that as far as youth crime is concerned, in the first years, there has been no great increase in Berlin. The number of crimes among youth and children has decreased or has remained stable. But as far as the schools are concerned, we've seen that the situation has changed. As you can see in the orange line, I'm not going to dwell on the methodology being used, but you can see that we have been observing a sort of reverse trend in the past few years. There has been an increase in the number of reported cases in schools, and there are also different data sources that we have analyzed. The curve that you see is based on police statistics, and as you can see, the reverse trend becomes even clearer if we consider the internal procedure for reporting criminal cases. And you see that in the past few years, the number of reports has increased significantly. Well, there is a small technical problem here, but if we consider this piece of data, which is extremely interesting, we see that there has been a growth in the number of reported cases among children below 14 years of age. We've had also a slight increase among teenagers, but if you consider the orange line on the top of the chart, you see that the number of reported cases in elementary school has constantly increased in the past few years. So these are cases that are reported by elementary schools. Of course, there are a lot of students in elementary schools, but we can see that the dynamic is very clear. And we see that the usual types of crimes among younger people are also committed by children. A second important element that does not pertain to Berlin only, but which we have been dealing with for a long time and with a political background, is that we have a sort of a clear social spatial segregation of the school landscape. Of course, children are exposed to many different factors, but you see the segregation in terms of social and spatial aspects. Here you see Berlin, and you see that the neighborhoods around Berlin are particularly exposed to crime. So compared to Mitte, so to downtown, and to other areas. Well, for example, Neukölln, well, these are usually neighborhoods that are socially disadvantaged, and you see that there is a higher number of reported cases because of the cultural disadvantages. But at the same time, we can see from the viewpoint of prevention that in urban peripheries, for example, Marzahn, Hellersdorf, Spandau, there are also serious situations, although the cultural diversity and the ethnic diversity is not so great as in downtown Berlin. But also in the periphery, we have to cope with conflicts and problems that children may encounter at school. Next slide. Well, considering that we are talking about data coming from school, so we also have to take into account that these are the so-called bright field data, because well, this may also have to do with the awareness raising campaigns by the police. Well, these are the cases that are reported, the so-called bright field, and they usually describe the average, then we have the data coming from schools internally, and we see that there is a sort of overlapping. And so on the one hand, we have constant values, and we have had a constant value in the first half, but starting from 2016, 17, and especially in 2019, there has been a great increase. So the topic of conflicts, violence, criminal prevention is very important for schools, and hence it should be reviewed and strengthened because it seems to increase quite significantly. The question is, what do we know about social phenomena, about the living together in schools, and what are the issues we should be confronted with? We have many studies in this respect, but also in the political analysis of these statistics, there are still a lot of issues to be solved. What do we mean by raising awareness? How can we promote the work of teachers who really engage themselves in working for the prevention of violence, and how can we foster teachers with a specific education. But there are a lot of open questions, and that's the reason why we've always thought it is necessary to perform a sort of questionnaire systematically, interviewing students and pupils. In Berlin, unfortunately, there are not such a service as in other federal states. And we have other comparisons and measurements. So the methodology is there, but as far as school culture, conflicts and violence, we have nothing. And so especially in the region of Berlin, we have a gap that should be filled. And so first of all, we carried out an analysis of the situation, and so we've identified that the situation has changed and that there are issues to focus on, but we should not only involve the authorities and the usual offices and units. In Berlin in 2016-17, there has been a lively debate on that, and measures were taken. For example, Berlin program against violence in schools was started in 2017. We also have had some changes in the school law. For example, in Berlin, crisis teams are being set up. So those who are confronted on a regular basis with conflicts and violence and are responsible for taking measures and also against sexualized violence. And so the situation is developing. This says nothing about the development of the situation in schools, but politically something has happened. And then the curriculum is also important. We have a new framework curriculum in the region of Brandenburg and Berlin, in which the topic of violence prevention has become an issue and has been anchored in the curriculum. And so the idea is to include this. We also have, for example, an anti-bullying or anti-discrimination office. So also the report and the intervention procedure has been evaluated and has been reviewed. And by the way, we also have the possibility to report cases digitally. This is a process that required more time than expected, but this is very important because quantitatively, this is a very important element. And then we have the anti-violence initiatives by the Berlin police. So this simply to highlight the evolutions that have been taking place. And then, this is just a list to highlight that from a political viewpoint, the topic has been analyzed and measures have been taken. Parental work is also has also been included. And there is a new program that has been underway for a few years, Pro-Respect, Democratizing Violence and Free Schools. And myself and my colleague, Sarah, are involved in this program as evaluators. And we will quickly present this program, which is, in our opinion, a very important approach, especially to strengthen the prevention of violence in schools. It's an interesting program because it combines violence, democracy building, and prevention of violence. The idea is not just to focus on pupils as possible perpetrators of crime, but to involve children in general. And the idea is to develop a broad range program in order to include these topics in the school development programs. There is a specialized office in the DKJS. We have a very good structure with a specialized office, but also in districts. We have the so-called pro-respect pilots who act in terms of networking. They foster the cooperation at a district level. And we have then coaches who work as tandems in schools. The idea is to collect social statistical data so that we can obtain a sort of leverage, and the idea is to extend these programs to as many schools as possible. These coaches remain as tandems in these schools for at least 5 years. They are hired by the ministry, and they remain in these schools for 5 years, which is the minimum amount of time in order to guarantee the development of a specific school. If you take a look at the implementation of the program, you see that we can point out as a positive piece of news that many schools have been involved. So we have 13 primary schools, so we have 7 community schools, the so-called Realschulen, and also grammar schools. So 2 grammar schools were included. And another positive element is that from the prevention of violence prevention, that schools work a lot in the field of violence prevention. It's not just a title, but they really anchored this topic in the school practice. For example, we have a wide range of different formats, so coaches and school approaches. So you see that there are different approaches to raise awareness and to educate on the topics of the program. For example, bullying, cyberbullying. We still have, we even have a standardized program, the so-called anti-bullying weeks. We have also peer-to-peer approaches. In order to include pupils in prevention in terms of constructive conflict management. They act as mediators, as peacemakers. They work in pilot projects. And then we have the issue of sexualized violence, which is anchored in law and which plays a very important role. So if something is included in the school law, what does it mean then in practical terms? Well, it seems that this is a great prerequisite. In other words, that the personnel and the teachers are properly educated and are able to implement these programs in schools, so that coaches are involved as well. So they act as counselors, as mediators. They try to involve pupils and to foster culture, the identification, the sense of belonging. So they try to create as many community projects as possible. Then we have the topic of democracy education. And this is a very broad scope, well, for the implementation of violence prevention measures. Pupils are active players, but in this case, we go beyond the field of violence prevention because there are co-decision processes at school that have to be properly organized. And then we have also, for example, the topic of school councils, so that the school structures can be involved, or anti-discriminatory school development. These are all important elements that are closely connected to violence prevention. The networking of schools in the social arena, with the participation of children and young people in the so-called parliaments. the integration of pupils from the so-called welcome classes in the social space. And then we have a third topic, which is school distance. And in research studies, this is one of the main risks for the development of distance of violence in schools. And so in the hierarchy of goals, this is the most difficult goal to achieve, because in this case, the school management has the main role and can contribute indirectly to the achievement of this goal, such as promoting a positive school culture to strengthen the bonding and identification with the school, the consideration of the prevention of the perception of pupils, and parental work. Now, let me speed up a little bit. So if we want to prevent violence in school, there are specific approaches to take into account. And here you see some of them. We need a long-term program design, and we need to resort to the staff and to the funds provided by the Senate Department for Education, Youth and Family. And we need also professional support and qualification by specialized agencies and specialized units, so that a professional approach can be adopted. So it is important to resort to professional support. This is very important. And it is also important to have well-educated social workers in schools. And for this, we need the proper resources, and we need proper networking with professionals in the field. The architecture of these programs, and I do not refer only to Berlin, but also to other regions as well, should be a multi-level one. So not only the state, but also districts, schools have to be included in this procedure. And we have a lot of topics to take into account: inclusion, the COVID pandemic, migrants. And so it is important to develop an architecture that is able to bear all these different levels. So we have a state level, and we have a social level in districts, in schools, in primary schools, so that the program can be properly guided and implemented. But one of the main topics in our evaluation is that we see that Berlin has hired special forces and qualified specialists without any time limit. And this is a sign of goodwill from the side of the political authorities. And so it's a very complicated mix, because we have many different professionals involved, but this is certainly very important, and the idea is to have a sort of a hybrid structure. And this was a short overview of a program that, in our opinion, fills in a gap, especially in socially disadvantaged schools. And we see that there are social issues that still have to be involved. There are a lot of other programs being in place which focus on violence prevention indirectly, but this is very important to anchor violence prevention in school curricula. And for this reason, the Pro-Respect program plays a very important role. Now, the Respect Academy is another program that we evaluated. But let me skip this in order to save a little bit of time. Just a couple of bullet points, as you can see here. So some of the things have already been said, but let me mention a couple of these bullet points. Violence prevention should be considered as a cross-sectional task of school development and not as a surplus task that school, an additional task that school have to be performed. And this pertains to sexualized violence, to bullying, and for this reason we need to develop a specific mindset in schools because it has to be considered as one of the crucial tasks that school have to implement. The final goal is to consider this as a prerequisite for schools, especially in difficult contexts. In that case, the school has to be able to make progress resorting to professional resources. So again, so the practice shows that this mindset has to be adopted, first of all, by the management of the school. We need teachers and social workers who need to be supported by the school managers who include the topic into the curriculum as mandatory matters, but within the framework of a participatory development, and the consistent implementation is one of the main prerequisites. The school personnel has to be involved from the first place. If we want to solve the problem and have the school develop, we need to adopt a bottom-down approach, a bottom-up approach, rather than a top-down approach. So responsibilities have to be formulated. Every school has its own curriculum with the specific tasks included. But first of all, we have to have teachers who know that these are tasks to be actually put concretely into practice and not simply point an item to flag or to a questionnaire to fill in by the secretary. So there must be responsibility. I already mentioned the crisis team in the region of Berlin. And this is not a new concept, but this is very important. It's a sort of multi-professional team with the school manager, with the social workers, the teacher, the specialized teachers, and they meet on a regular basis, and they deal with issues and problems, but also with strategies of intervention and prevention. And these are formats that should be included as mandatory in the school programs. And if so, we would have good schools measured on specific indicators. Ideally, and this already exists in the curriculum of teachers, so violence prevention and many other issues must be integrated in the curriculum. As I said, ideally, these issues should be supported by the school with the specific formats. Pupils have to be involved in order to promote the empowerment and a sort of democratic school culture, so that participatory projects can be put in place and at an older age. This can lead to digital competence, digital skills, but starting from elementary school, the involvement of pupils should be anchored in the curriculum. Again, so they should be standardized, involve pupils, the protection and the support of victims of violence in schools. We need a multi-professional cooperation, not only between teachers and pupils, but also with a multi-professional stance, cooperation and networking in the social space. So acquiring external partners for the aforementioned projects plays a very important role. In this respect, let me close and